do these events to help call attention to books that either stand a good chance of being unfairly ignored or stand a good chance of being unfairly attacked. Sadly, that happens to be the case with many, many extremely valuable books. Tonight is no exception. Now, I can't resist starting out by observing that, as I suppose you all know, in about an hour from now, the President is going to make his speech at West Point, offering us his wisdom about providing troops to Afghanistan. And what we hear is that he's picked the number 34,000. That would make for an extremely apt, and unfortunately apt, intro to tonight's event, but to do so would be to sell our guest and his book short, because this is actually not just about this event, this book, are not just about the war, not just about war and peace, but something much, much, much larger, about as large as it gets. There's a widespread misimpression, common on the left and right, that a certain kind of progressive agenda, a certain respect for the law, a certain reverence for the Constitution, that these things are left-wing. This is a leftist idea, that leftists and liberals would like, for example, Obama to prosecute Bush Cheney for war crimes. That it's a leftist tick, you know, that we don't want an imperial presidency. How we got to this moment in time, you know, would make for a very interesting conversation. But the fact is, there's nothing really leftist about this at all. If that's the case, if it's left-wing, then the framers of the Constitution were, you know, leftists, like the Shining Path guerrillas, I guess. You know, the Bolshevik Party, leftists. This is not a leftist concern. This is an all-American concern. And I'm, therefore, you know, more than pleased to be able to welcome David Swanson tonight. He is a prodigious figure. He's written a great book, Daybreak, that I urge you all to buy tonight. You will sign your copy. I'm going to talk about it. He's also the author of a staggering number of daily dispatches. I've never really seen anything like it. I mean, speaking of the framers, he would have been right at home in those heroic days of pamphleteering. I think he'll take that as a compliment. These things are not only cogently argued and well-informed, but, you know, beautifully written. I really don't know how he does it. I hope he doesn't collapse at the podium before our eyes. But he is really an important figure, and he's speaking to us now at a moment when what he has to say is easily no less important than it was under Bush Cheney. In fact, more important, because Obama's elections caused a lot of people to, you know, wipe their brows in relief and then go back to sleep. That's not wise. If only for the base pragmatic reason that the next president could come along and do things with equal, you know, willfulness and unaccountability, and then you'll all be upset if it happens to be from a political vantage point that you don't like. In short, you know, what's been going on, at least since the stolen election of 2000, is grossly un-American and highly dangerous to the welfare of the American people, to the survival of the American Republic, and to the people of the whole world. So, what we're going to do tonight is hear from David about his book. We're also going to hear from John Nichols, who wrote the foreword to Daybreak, who's kindly agreed to join us and is in a taxi cab now, I'm sure leaning forward, his pulse racing, it's just flown in. Let me add that John is the co-author with Robert W. McChesney of a great and pertinent new book called The Death and Life of American Journalism, which will be coming out next month. A book just as important as and closely related to this one. So, after David speaks and John, when he gets here, speaks, which they'll do kind of informally, as usual, we'll throw the floor open to you all and we'll have a Q&A. And then, as I say, you'll buy his book and he'll sign it. So please join me in welcoming David Swanson.
Thank you. This is really the first full-length book that I've ever written, and I have a lot of good books by people that gave me sort of a framework for how to do that, and some of those books, some of the best ones, were by Mark Crispin Miller, so it's wonderful to have him introducing me with my book. Yes. Some of them were by John Nichols as well, and I'll give you some thoughts until John gets here, if he's not too fast or too slow, and then we'll have a discussion and questions and answers. And I want to thank Bob Furtick for being here, who runs Democrats.com, which I am privileged to do some work for. Raise your hand, Bob. And 40 years ago today in this city, my parents gave birth to twin babies, and I was one of them. And I think this is the first book event my parents have attended, and I want to thank them for being here. Just what you want for your birthday, right? 34,000 more young people sent to kill and die for no good reason. The book looks primarily, the latter two-thirds of the book is about what we need to do and how to do it and envisioning a better place and strategically getting there. But the first part of the book and the analysis of the whole book, the problem that it addresses that I don't see addressed sufficiently anywhere else is a question of where power sits. Who gets to have power? And I think overwhelmingly the biggest consequence of what we do in these years and what we've done in recent years will be where we leave powers in Washington, D.C. Bigger than launching or ending any particular war or passing any particular good bill is where do we leave powers, assuming we're going to have some more presidents. I don't know about you, but I'm probably not going to like every future president. But you're going to have to absolutely worship every future president if you're going to think it's wise to leave them the powers we are now, not just up until last year, but now, leaving them. Because Bush and Cheney seized dramatically more powers than anybody before and handed them on to the next guy, who is not giving any of them back. And that's to be expected. It involves some broken promises, things like signing statements, which candidate Obama was not going to use, but President Obama does. But it's typical. Presidents haven't tended to come in and voluntarily give back the powers that had been accumulated by all the previous presidents. What's rather unique is the almost total absence of pushback from Congress. Right? So we're talking about powers like the power of war. Congress wants the president to have the power to make war. Congress doesn't want to have to make these decisions. They want to just pass the buck. But the Constitution doesn't give them that choice. They are required. Instead, we don't declare war in Congress anymore. At best, we just don't call it a war, as with what we're doing in Pakistan, or we pass a vague authorization to use force. And whether the president complies with the terms of it or not, it's okay. And whether it's relevant at all anymore many years later, is okay. We're not still searching for the weapons of mass destruction and so forth, but you still have this authorization to use force, and once you get a war started, the war just stays started. President Bush took money from elsewhere, used it to secretly begin a war in Iraq before having any authorization. He made a treaty with an occupied government of Iraq without getting that treaty ratified by the Senate, as the Constitution requires, and put war in there, 3 years of war in a treaty. So the power to make war is very firmly in the White House. I mean, this debate of recent weeks, there have been 3 positions that any American has held. The president should escalate the war in Afghanistan. The president should not escalate the war in Afghanistan, or in some cases should withdraw entirely, or the president should do what the president wants. I mean, almost nobody is outside of those 3 positions, except for a few of us and the United States Constitution, which says that Congress decides when and where we have wars and to what extent, and oversees the military and funds it or doesn't. And this was very, very intentionally and very wisely done, putting this power to decide on war in a different branch of government from the commander-in-chief, who would execute the will of Congress even in his role as commander-in-chief. But we're also talking about the power to make laws, the central power to make laws. They're made with signing statements. Sign a bill, rewrite it with a signing statement. They're made with executive orders without the pretense of involving Congress. They're made routinely by the president telling Congress what law to draft or drafting it for them. And the Congress members ask the presidents to draft the laws for them. And they're now made with secret memos, too, right? President Bush had lawyers in the Justice Department write secret memos legalizing blatant crimes, which included not just torture, but also aggressive war at the whim of any future president. Those are not being thrown out. The current president has told the Justice Department those people cannot be prosecuted. At best, we can consider prosecuting some low-level people who strayed from the illegal policies in the secret memos, thereby, if anything, reinforcing that. Imagine if you could go hire a lawyer at someone else's expense to write you memos to put in your pocket to legalize any crime you might want to commit. And you have the world's largest military to play with and the federal government, and so, this is the closest thing to absolute power, right? And the powers to make treaties, the powers to make appointments, the powers to spend money, the powers to operate in secrecy, the powers to be above the law, the powers to imprison without charge, to spy without warrant, to rendition, to torture. All of this is being fixed in place more firmly now than one administration alone could do. This is the major consequence of the Bush-Cheney years and of these years, and it's not being talked about. And Congress is not going to take powers back and use them on our behalf unless we force Congress to, and we clean up Congress so that it represents us. This is the attraction of the peace movement trying to lobby a president of all ridiculous absurdities, is that, people are familiar with their representative. They know that he or she is hopeless. They've tried for decades to influence them, and they've been completely immune to public influence, and you can't unelect them. Well, let's look at the president. He's new. Maybe he's better. But, difficult as it may look to influence members of the House and get them to stand up and say, we aren't going to fund these wars, it's a lot easier than trying to influence a president. A fact that we were much more in touch with a year ago when a different guy was president. Tonight we have something being advertised as an exit plan that sends 30-some thousand more troops into a war. This is the level of absurdity we've reached in our public discussion. We're now talking about something that will reach 2 to 5% of Americans as a public option. Right? If those words had come out of George Bush's mouth, they would have been denounced by every liberal group in the country as deceptive. But this is the point we've reached. The Congress has chosen to give up its ability to have anything to do with our policies, except for saying things. And the two key powers that are gone from the Congress are impeachment and subpoena. We impeached a judge this year for groping people, which I'm not supporting. But when you have someone who signed memos legalizing torture, legalizing aggressive war in order to be nominated to be a judge, and who was nominated and became a judge, and those confessions to felonies are out there in the public realm, and he's still a judge. I'm talking about Jay Bybee. And we can't impeach him because there's no sex involved. He's not a Democrat. Fox News wouldn't like it. He used to work in the royal throne room. We can't impeach him. Then what good is our ability to impeach random liberals who engage in sexual offenses far from the nation's capital? That's not the power of impeachment. And if you don't have the power of impeachment, then you can't be a branch of government that threatens the other branches. In 2007, 2008, You know, the Democrats came in and had a majority and said they wouldn't impeach anybody no matter what. Not going to impeach you. But they put up a 2-year-long pretense of doing something short of that, using the tool called subpoena. And again, if you or I get a subpoena, and we tell the guy at the door with the subpoena to go Cheney himself, we're going to jail. You're going to jail. Right? We are in the class of Americans who have very little to do with making the laws but have to obey them, as opposed to the class of Americans who are above the law, who make the laws by memo, the class that Jay Bybee is in. And dozens of subpoenas in 2007 and 2008 were simply ignored. Simply ignored. Condoleezza Rice said, these are her words, "I'm not inclined to comply with that." Dick Cheney preemptively announced in 2006 he wasn't going to comply with any subpoenas, and he didn't. Right? Dozens of these people simply didn't comply with subpoenas. The one exception this year, Karl Rove partially complying, not under oath, not in public, and so forth. Other than that, all of these top officials of our country who were subpoenaed for 2 years in this ongoing pretense that Congress cared simply didn't comply, and the subpoenas have not been reissued. To my knowledge, in the year 2009, no committee has subpoenaed anybody in the executive branch, in power, in Washington, or formerly thereof, or reissued any of the previous subpoenas. Right? Who knows what inherent contempt is? It is not the feeling in your stomach when Dick Cheney comes on the screen. It's something very specific. I know Bob knows what this is. Anybody? For the better part of U.S. history, congressional committees enforced their own subpoenas, and they talked about it as preserving the existence, the right to preserve the existence of the first branch of our government, the Congress. And it was thought of as inherent contempt, the inherent power of the primary branch of our government to enforce contempt citations. Right? And you go back and it looks laughable, and they're bringing somebody in to apologize to a committee to restore the dignity of Congress because there's been some sort of slight and so forth. It looks medieval. But they thought of Congress as something that should have dignity. Right? That is dramatically different from now when they simply don't care. And so 75 years ago, Congress did what it has habitually done through U.S. history, tried to strengthen something by weakening it, by passing it off to another branch of government, right? Just as they, after Nixon's abuses, they passed the War Powers Act to make a law about presidential war powers that actually weakens what the Constitution says. Here they pass a law to make it a statutory offense to be in contempt of Congress. So you have the Justice Department enforce contempt citations. And that works up until the Bush-Cheney years when you're subpoenaing employees of the Justice Department and formerly thereof, and members of the same crime family. And the Justice Department simply wouldn't enforce the subpoenas, and the congressional committees said, okay, well, we tried. And then they finally say, well, we'll take you to court. There's a real branch of government. We won't claim to have any power, but we'll take you to court. And eventually they get a ruling, but nobody complies with the subpoenas. For the better part of U.S. history, any committee would simply send the Capitol Police Force to seize someone and literally hold them in contempt until they testified to the satisfaction of the committee, which is not just I do not recall, sir, I do not recall, sir, but to the satisfaction of the committee. And that power hasn't gone away. It's still there. It's just not used. So one means by which Congress could regain its standing as a branch of government that has to be listened to, that can't just pass nice laws and then have them ignored, would be to subpoena somebody. Anybody, for God's sake, subpoena volunteer to be the person subpoenaed. Do, whatever you can do. Or impeach somebody. When Alberto Gonzales fled, it was because they were subpoenaing him on both sides of the hill, bringing him in and making him talk, and because there was a one-sentence bill in Congress put in by a congressman from Washington State that said the House Judiciary Committee shall consider whether Alberto Gonzales has committed impeachable offenses. And you have co-sponsors and co-sponsors and co-sponsors, and he quits and leaves. Because that's a threat, right? So when the Justice Department says we won't enforce the law on torturers, on war criminals, if there's a threat of an impeachment hearing to which nothing can be denied, you can't hold back evidence, right? I mean, we sort of have two choices on the torture thing we teach Americans to read, so it's nice that we're in a bookstore, or we get some of those videos and photos, right? Well, one way to get things is an impeachment hearing. You can't deny things. It's a serious threat, you know, and why we can't get someone like Congressman Gerald Nadler of New York, who has supported the impeachment of Jay Bybee since April, to put in a one-sentence bill that says we shall consider the impeachment of Jay Bybee, and let us go out and get co-sponsors on it. You know, these are ideas. I want to bring John Nichols in here, but I want to say a word more about the war as well. And you know, the Attorney General on the torture issue, the Attorney General said not 2 weeks ago that we would have this report in November, and it's now December. You know, the congressional committees that have these self-indicting memos are waiting for the Justice Department's own report on the torture lawyers, which has been run by, in an unprecedented move, has been run by the very subjects of the report to allow them to suggest edits. It's going to be probably the story that we're now getting out of England, of the Attorney General there telling Tony Blair explicitly, this war will be illegal, this war will be illegal, and then watering that down and at the last minute saying, you know, okay, go ahead. And this report is going to be dramatically watered down. We're going to have to demand the early versions of it. But absurdly, the congressional committees and the bar associations that have been asked to disbar these lawyers are all waiting for this stupid report. And now it's not here, and we're supposed to forget it and move on and wait until 6 months from now the Attorney General testifies again. And we're similarly being asked to forget things and believe crazy things on the war. And, you know, we've elected a president who said he would pull 1 or 2 brigades out a month for 16 months and we would largely be out of Iraq. And that has not begun. And we're supposed to all forget it. You know, we do have this unconstitutional treaty that we're already violating and openly planning to violate that says everybody out by the end of 2011. And apparently nobody's going to get very excited about that until about November 2011. But, you know, there's going to be another treaty, you know. Somebody needs to sit down with some Native Americans and ask them about treaties and how they work, because if you have no control over it, they're going to replace it with another treaty. It's not going to be complied with. Well, on Afghanistan, we have a president who said he would escalate. And we're supposed to accept that, even though the public now opposes escalating, because we have this idea that elected officials should be who they were before the most recent election, rather than who we are now. And in Congress, we're starting to hear talk in the right direction. And amazingly, even from, you know, the expert authorities in Washington, the people you have to listen to because they've been wrong about everything up until now, you're hearing dramatic reversals on Afghanistan, incredible opposition on Afghanistan. But what you're hearing out of Congress thus far is mostly talk and avoids the idea of Congress actually doing something, right? So you have a good bill. You have a good bill to have an exit strategy, any exit strategy. You have a bill to say we won't fund an escalation. You have a bill to say we should have a war tax to pay for these wars. And these are all good bills, and they move in the right direction. But until today, when I was lucky enough to be on a conference call with some other people, I wasn't aware of any movement even beginning in Congress and in the peace movement to get members of the House to commit to voting no on the next war money, right? Because if the House votes no on the war money, then the Senate and the President can do whatever the heck they want, but they can't fight wars. And so to pass a bill through the House that says we don't want to fund the wars, and then have to pass it through the Senate and get the President to sign it, you know, is a nice gesture, but it's not a serious move in the direction of most easily actually ending the thing. And, you know, but we're sort of just at the point of getting people to even talk about Congress at all, because they all want to go to the president and ask the president of all absurdities to do what we want done. In March, a lot of us are going to go to Washington, D.C. And protest nonviolently and shut things down to the extent that we are able, as any civilized nation would have long since done. And I'd encourage you to go to peaceoftheaction.org if you can make the trip down for the second half of March of next year. Peace is spelled like P-E-A-C-E, peaceoftheaction.org. But I want to see if John Nichols is here, who wrote a wonderful introduction to my book, far better than the rest of the book. And before we have questions and answers for I guess for me and John and Mark, let's have some words from John Nichols.
Wow, I love this intimate. This is great. I feel like I've returned to the book touring world for a brief moment. Bob and Chesney and I have a new book coming out soon, which and because it's not out, I can use my usual line, which is makes a good holiday gift for David's book, and I would recommend it in all the best ways. Although I'm exceptionally furious with David, probably as mad at him as anyone I know, because he stole my idea for a book, and I swear this is. I'm always doing too many things, and I met about 2 years ago with a publisher because we did this book called Genius of Impeachment, which was a history of impeachment, and so it was a really good idea. Very, very good idea. And then I met with the publisher and said, we should really follow up on this and say, write about the Imperial Presidency and what the presidency has become and the need to deconstruct it and really to reassert constitutional values in the United States. And he said, well, it's a pretty good idea, let's do it, blah, blah, blah. I'll talk to him, went out and did other things. Didn't do it, and then David comes along and writes a book. Bastard. And writes a better book than I would have. I seriously, get a copy, get a bunch of them. I'll be very quick. I apologize for being late. I was another victim of the airline industry. Flying in, and we got in. The cab, New York cab's fabulous. Got me here in like 14 minutes from the airport. It's unbelievable. So tonight we meet when the president is about to announce that we're all schmucks, right? Because that's really what he's saying, right? It's just y'all worked really hard to elect me because I was going to set a new foreign policy and do things really, really different, and fooled you. I'm going to do the same thing that the guy before me did. Only I'm going to do it worse because I'm a Democrat, and when Democrats do what Republicans do, it's worse. And I'll tell you why. A very good friend of mine, Sherrod Brown, who's a senator from Ohio, an incredibly courageous, really great senator. As a member of the House, he went to the floor of the House in 2003, right after the war in Iraq was declared, and read letters from family members of troops who didn't want the war into the Congressional record, night after night. Just a really outstanding guy. And he really knows politics very, very well. And when Al Gore was elected president and then had it stolen from him in 2000, I was talking to Sherrod and I said, is there anything good that will come of this? Having George Bush as president of the United States. And he said, well, there's one good thing. Because with a Republican in there, I'll be able to go to a lot of Democrats and say, we can vote against him now. And they'll actually do it, something they wouldn't do when Bill Clinton was there, on trade and economics and a host of other issues. And this is our critical moment that we're in. We have a reasonably decent president, a pretty nice guy. I've interviewed him many times. I actually like Barack Obama a lot. But he's very, very weak and very, very untested and untrained, especially in foreign policy. And he is taking the advice of some of the worst people in the world, as he's also doing in economics. And our job is a very, very simple one. If you want Barack Obama to succeed in any way whatsoever, if you want him to be anything other than a kind of a cooler, hipper Lyndon Johnson, and in fact, let me take it back. I'd say it's possible. There's the outside chance that he could be a cooler, hipper Herbert Hoover, which would be really bad. So I'm going with Johnson, because Johnson had a little But if you want to be something other than a cooler, hipper Lyndon Johnson, you have a fundamental responsibility to do now what David suggests, which is to get out there and be intensely active, not against a man. Because this is one thing that I've learned in covering politics for like 3,000 years now. Men and even women do not matter. Men and women are irrelevant. They are simply the pieces that we put in to work the machine at a certain point. It is the machine itself that matters. And it is how that machine operates, what its structures are, what goes on with it. And again, that's why David's book is so important, because it talks about those structures. It talks about the reality. And I will leave you with one critical thought. I'm glad you're here tonight, by the way, as opposed to watching the president, because it will be heartbreaking to watch him do. He would be heartbreaking to be treated as such stupid people, which is what he's going to do. Because he's going to say, we're going to surge troops in, so we're now at 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. It's a huge number. I mean, this is a lot of U.S. soldiers. Kids from my state of Wisconsin and David's state of Virginia and your city of New York, all into this horrible, completely unnecessary war. If you haven't seen Robert Greenwald's documentary, Rethink Afghanistan, go see it. He's got all these CIA chiefs from Kabul saying, Taliban's not a threat, Al-Qaeda's not here, this is a stupid war, etc., etc., etc. He's going to surge all these troops into this war. And then he's going to say, but don't oppose me. Don't undercut me, because I have an exit strategy. And I don't know why the left keeps arguing for an exit strategy. There's nothing stupider than an exit strategy. That is like, I mean, I'm not even going to make the sexual metaphor of an exit strategy. Let me just suggest to you that anybody who tells you they have an exit strategy is telling you they are not going to exit. Right? They have a strategy to do it. No, you don't want an exit strategy. You want an exit. You want to leave. You do not want a timeline, a theory. Exit strategy is the deconstructionism of, that's too English lit a theory, but exit strategy is the deconstructionism of politics. It means nothing. It is totally, it brings you down to the dumbest level of nothing being there at all. And that's what Obama's going to give you tonight. It's a horrible, horrible sop. And so, you're here tonight with David Swanson, one of the most remarkable activists in America. You have a chance to buy his book. You have a chance to take it home, and you have a chance to read it rather than be heartbroken. And you will go to sleep later tonight, and tomorrow morning you'll awaken, unlike every other progressive. I hope you're all progressives, or you know, old right conservatives, whatever you are. Unlike all these other people who wake up tomorrow morning feeling, you know, vaguely dissatisfied, like you went on a really bad date. You can instead wake up happy and saying, wow, I'm a part of a long, centuries-long now, struggle to make America what it's supposed to be. And I will close with that. David and I have a favorite quote from a guy who lived up the road from him, James Madison. And the right claims James Madison because they've never read him. If they read James Madison, they would know that, of course, Madison was the great opponent of war, especially war of women. He said that this democracy cannot long survive in a state of endless war. So war is the true wet nurse of executive aggrandizement. Those of you who know what a wet nurse is, of course, it keeps the sickly child alive. If you want the president to be more powerful than any president in history, give him a long-term war. George Bush knew that. And frankly, unfortunately, some of the people around Barack Obama know that. They know that maintaining the war in Afghanistan is very good politically. It helps him to get reelected in 2012 because he is seen as tough, and he's going to have some idiot Republican running against him who will be worse, right? And so you claim the political ground. It works very, very well. Trust me, it's a strategy well used. The problem is it's completely immoral. It's wrong. And it keeps handing off the crime. We should have impeached George Bush and Dick Cheney, not because of George Bush and Dick Cheney, but because we didn't want Barack Obama to be doing this right now. And I'm not saying we should impeach Barack Obama. Frankly, that doesn't give me great pleasure at this point. But what I am saying is we should definitely force him to be a better president than he is. And we should bang and bang and bang at that. Because at the end of the day, if he finishes his presidency, having done what he's doing so far, he will hand off a worse presidency than the one George Bush handed off. It will be a dramatically more powerful presidency, able to do dramatically worse things. And the fact of the matter is, as I said before, I don't believe in men or even in women. I believe in the structure. Founders established a brilliant structure. They said at the Constitutional Convention, our purpose is to chain the dogs of war, to make it impossible for a president to do what kings did, which is lead us into wars of whim. We are now engaged in 2 wars of whim. Tonight, some mother, someplace, will get the word that her child has died in an unnecessary war. And tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the night after that. It is not because of oil, although it is because of oil. It is not because of geopolitics, although it is because of geopolitics. At the end of the day, it is because we have allowed the structures that were established to chain the dogs of war to wither. And we must renew those structures. Renew the constitutional system of checks and balances using the tool of impeachment intended by the founders to punish those who led us into these wars and to tell Barack Obama, frankly, that if he doesn't pay attention, that he too will be held to account. And let me tell you something. Yesterday, very conservative congressman from Utah, Jason Chaffetz, got up and gave this militantly anti-war address. He's one of the most conservative people in Congress. I'm telling you, if Republicans get control of the House and the Senate in 2010, you watch how quick they grab that Constitution and put it to use. And then you ask yourself, why weren't people wise enough to listen to Bob Furtick and to David Swanson and others who said that we needed to impeach Bush and Cheney? These are complex times we live in. Your roadmap through these times is a wonderful book called Daybreak. Buy a copy for yourself. Buy a copy for a friend. And then go out and talk to people about it. You, in the end, will be doing Barack Obama the greatest favor, seriously, the greatest favor you can, by reasserting a constitutional system of checks and balances in this country, as David Swanson suggests. Thank you very much.